Obviously, there's been lessons in wrestling I'm sure you've learned that don't apply in real life. Things that are like, this would never occur in real life compared to pro wrestling. But is there a life lesson you learned through covering wrestling?
Maybe it helps with politics a little bit, in the sense that the phoniness, and you see the phoniness in politics, kind of helps you see it, I think. No, the life lessons I've learned in wrestling don't necessarily have to do with wrestling, but have to do with reporting. And those, it wouldn't matter the subject. You would have to still learn those lessons. I could learn those lessons. Wrestling gives you different kinds of lessons because it's such a different world. I think you get to see, a wide variety of people, because wrestlers certainly are not cookie cutter people, not whatsoever. They vary. It's like you have some really honest guys, you have some really dishonest guys. You have ambitious guys. You have people who are not that ambitious. You have people with incredible drive, who sacrifice so much. I think like covering wrestling, you do get kind of, a perspective of a lot of different things.
You had a great perspective, too, learning back in the day from the late, great journalist Frank Deford. For those that don't know, he was on Real Sports. He ran a number of publications. Just an absolutely legendary writer, a guy who gave his full endorsement to you. Looking back, how fortunate do you feel to learn from him? Not forget wrestling, just when it comes to journalism and life.
What a lucky break that was. It's so funny because it was like, when I was like a kid, like 10, 11 years old, he was my favorite writer. So the idea that I was able to work with him for, a year and a half so closely was like a dream come true. I remember like when he called me up when he was starting the National to do it, it was almost like I don't know how to. It was so weird because when I took the call, it was like, how did this happen? You know what I mean? It's like this was never going to happen in my life, and there it did. And yeah, learning from him, he was so experienced, and he saw through so much bullshit. And I definitely learned a lot about ethics and things like that, and just discussions. Because we never talked wrestling, although we sometimes talked Vince McMahon. But we didn't really talk wrestling because he wasn't really a wrestling fan. But we would talk, boxing. I remember he was, and it didn't happen yet. But I remember him telling me, like, you're gonna get to a certain age, and you're gonna hate boxing. I remember him telling me that because he hated boxing, and I didn't get to where I hated boxing. But I remember him telling me, he was like a big boxing fan, and then he reached a certain age, and he absolutely hated boxing because of the human loss, lives lost, things like that, deaths in the ring, and the fact that in the end, like the fighters, some of them make it, but most of them don't, and it chews you up and spits you out, and you get brain damage and the whole bit. He really was not a fan of how boxing was, and I remember, but he had a wide variety of interests. A lot of sports people, it's baseball, football, hockey, basketball. He was like me, what we both had in common is we were into, like, if it was beach volleyball or roller derby or whatever, it was like that stuff fascinated us, the offbeat sports. So, it was the luckiest break for sure. It's probably the luckiest break of my career. The other one was, early on when some of the wrestlers started talking to me, and luckily I got really smart ones talking to me, and some of the promoters and kind of teaching me, the methods of promoting, which was really good because, they kind of taught me to see through the BS of other promoters. I was really lucky at for both of those things.
When did you realize that the Wrestling Observer newsletter could become a business and your career?
When I first started it, I thought that the potential was there, but I didn't really expect it. I guess in 86, 87, when I was making no money on it, and I was working so hard as a sports writer, and I kind of had to make the choice, and my parents and everybody just thought, well, you got to keep the wrestling thing and go into sports writing, and I chose the other one, and everybody was like, you chose the one with no future. But I felt like that wrestling was undercovered, and I I could fill a better, like there's always going to be some people covering sports, but I didn't think wrestling had that, so I thought that I could be of more benefit on wrestling. And also, by that time, it was like, even though I wasn't making any money doing wrestling, I was more famous doing wrestling than I was doing, high school sports or, whatever, soccer or whatever. So it kind of like led me there. And then, after I kind of made that call and I wrote, I did the Who's Who book, which did start making money. And then the National came. And then that was like, when I started writing for the National, that's when it really turned around, those 2 years, because I was in a big daily paper and my name got big and I got a lot of new subscribers. I mean, really, my subscriptions, I don't remember what it was, but, it went from a very modest number and probably doubled, or tripled during that 2-year period.
Wow.
And from that point on, I've been able to make a good living out of it. So the National was huge. That period was a great period of growth, just by having the exposure in the National every week.
I've interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs, and the recurring theme that they tell me in their stories is they're always worried that one day they wake up and everything's just gone. Everything they worked for, everything they built, and they always feel like they have to keep refining, keep trying new things. Obviously, stay consistent with what's working. What does Dave Meltzer do in order to not only stay consistent, but to make sure that this keeps going and growing and growing as you get older?
Pray. I'm at the mercy of the business, unfortunately. And really, the top company kind of determines your, I would like, like a big wrestling war would be really cool. And we have one. I think that's been interesting. But we've been lucky in the sense of, I think we got into the podcasting thing at the bottom, at the ground floor. And so by the time it got big, we were established. So I think that was a real lucky. But it's, the business success, I mean, it's like with Bryan and Alvarez, we work really, really hard, like just super hard, and we're super dedicated to our clientele. I mean, literally, we don't miss shows. And I mean, no matter what happens in our personal life, and sometimes we may have to record at 1:30 a.m. Actually, that's more often than you think. But we just don't miss shows. So the hard work is certainly part of it, but it's also, it's understanding what we cover as well, and it's also been a lot of, I think there's been a lot of luck in the sense of the podcasting thing hitting at the right time. The internet changed it. It's made things more competitive, but that's good. But it also has opened up information a lot more, and the ease of contacting people is a lot more. The internet has some horrible qualities, but by and large, I know a lot of people think that it's a negative. I think it's a giant positive, but there is a giant negative to it, horrible negative. But the positive outweighs the negative.
In addition to, of course, running Wrestling Observer, F4WOnline.com, you're also a parent. You're also a husband. You're an entrepreneur. How the hell do you balance everything every day?
Not very well, but I try really hard. I work really hard at what I can do at all facets, but it's very hard, that aspect. But I love my kids though, I got great kids. My son's awesome. He really is. Never, valedictorian of his class and never gets into trouble, and pretty darn genius, and a lot more grown up than I was when I was his age. That's for sure.
That's awesome. God bless him. That's great to hear, and definitely wish him and your family the best. So, Dave, we really do appreciate the time. Before we get you out of here, what's the best piece of advice you give anybody hoping to have success?
Work really hard is almost like the necessity. When you're young, listen and learn as much as you can from smart people and pay freaking attention to them. You don't have to listen to everything they say, but there's a lot. If you're with smart people and you figure out what they say works and doesn't, you're going to be way ahead of the game. But you got to listen. You got to listen. And, if you don't listen, and you don't want to learn, that to me, my key is that I never want to stop learning. Other people think they already know, and it's like, I don't know, and I know more than you, so you don't know either. You never fully, like wrestling, you never fully know wrestling. Nobody fully knows wrestling. The people who think they know wrestling, they're the ones that are going to be out of touch, because it's always going to change. But yeah, just listen. I mean, from writing, read a lot of good writers. I mean, and you learn from how they do it. I mean, I'll never be Frank Deford, but my God, I when I was a kid, I read, Frank Deford and Scott Ostler and different guys like that, and even the stats guys. I was really into there were certain writers that were really good stats guys, and they fascinated me, and I learned the stats aspect as well as the flowing words aspect. So you got to learn both. You got to learn the business that like if you're a sports writer and you don't know business, I think you're way behind. I mean, I know with MMA, a lot of the reporters, when I first started covering MMA, the MMA reporters were so far behind on the business end, and they've caught up. But when they started, it's like they just liked fighting. It's like it's the fight business. If you don't know the business, you don't get the fighting. You don't get. They would complain about UFC making matches, and I would sit there and go like, that's the right match to make. It's the match the fans want to see, and they would just be. But it's not, number one and number two, and it's like the fans don't want number one and number two. They want personality. So, and in time you figure that out. Just like listen, pay attention to what the fans want, and also understand that will always change, whether it's football or hockey or whatever. What gets the fans going is going to be something new, not something old, and it's going to always change. But if you know that going in, and you see the trends starting somewhere early, look for the new trends. If you look for the new trends, you'll be ahead of the game. And it's better to be ahead than behind.
Well said. And how and one more. How cool is it? Right, you just mentioned before you grew up reading Frank Deford. Later, you worked for him, were mentored by him, learned from him. How cool is it these days, whether it be wrestlers, fans, whoever, to hear, Dave, I grew up reading you. I still read you to this day. I love your shows, all that jazz.
It's really cool. When we do the Q&As before the pandemic, we would go to like big shows like WrestleMania or AEW shows or whatever, New Japan shows. I would see people who've been reading for like 30 years and 35 years. It's awesome. That was the most gratifying part of my job for sure, was meeting people at live shows. And that is actually among the, of all the things, one of the things that I miss the most is going to shows. The other thing about going to shows is that when you go to the right kind of shows and you watch the young wrestlers on the way up, you get to kind of see what's going to be working in 5 years too. So, unfortunately that doesn't exist right now. I can't wait for that to come back, but, obviously we gotta get a vaccine, because that's really going to be the only answer. But we've got to get rid of this disease, because we're all going to be crippled until that happens, unfortunately. And it's a very trying period. I think it's like in many ways it's the worst period in the history of our lives. I mean, some people's lives are better. I mean, in the sense, economically, some people are good and some people are bad and all that. But as far as like overall, I think, especially now with school about to start and the mess of if we send kids to school right now, it's going to be a complete disaster, unfortunately. And but you want your kids to learn at the same time, so it's like we're in a really trying period.
Hey, as the old saying goes, it's cool to read about history. It sometimes sucks to live through it, but the one thing is from that standpoint. Right now sucks, but in 3 years, having lived through this, we're all gonna grown up a ton, and we're gonna be a lot smarter for it. Not everyone, but many of us are gonna be, because we were forced to adapt and learn, and that because you're forced into understanding what you like and what you don't like, and when you can't do it, you learn to miss it and you appreciate it more. So there's a lot of positives that could come from this period, but they're not happening now. They're going to happen in like 3 years when we look back.
economically, like, there's smarter ways to do what we used to be doing. But, living through it is a very difficult period.
It is, but hey, from a day-to-day perspective, right? I'm sure you can attest to this. As long as you wake up, as long as you have your health, I mean, look, anything's possible as long as you can, say you're healthy. Because unfortunately, not everybody can say that right now.
Health is absolutely 100% the most important thing. 100%. I mean, be blessed that you have your health, because if you don't, the health is definitely the most important thing for sure.